obscure world of parking. We use it every day, but have we really capitalized on the intricacies of our industry? In this podcast, the Parking Network will go behind the scenes and talk to industry professionals about all things parking, from the horizon of evolving technology and even stories of the old days. We hope to encourage and inspire operators and property managers alike to look at parking through a new lens.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Our Parking Industry podcast. Today, me, Trina Tudor, and I have here with me Clyde Wilson, are going to be talking about Clyde's parking rules to live by. This is something we've mentioned before in a couple of episodes, and it will continue to be involved in all of our episodes and all of our conversations. So, Clyde, do you want to talk a little bit about the basics before we start talking about the rules to live by?
Sure. You know, the basics of our business, and it's funny how this little short statement that I probably heard when I was my early years in the business, I don't remember who it came from. Like most of this that falls into the rules to live by, I don't remember who actually generated them. I don't believe it was me, except for one of these items. I think this one probably came from Monroe Carroll in my early days in the parking business. But there was this just description of who we are, simplified it down to one sentence. And the sentence is, we sell a parking space for time. That's it. No matter who we are, whether you're at a university, a municipality, an airport, a hospital, commercial parking operator, or an event manager, the basics of all of us is that we sell a parking space for time. Now, how we do that sometimes gets more complicated, and we make it a lot harder than it really sounds like it is. But it is a very complex business that we've all come to know and love how complicated it is and what a challenge it is. But the basics are, we sell a parking space for time. So that's what starts us off, Trina.
Okay, so again, before we jump in, can you talk a little bit about why you developed your rules to live by? Why did you come up with these parking rules to live by, and when did you come up with them?
Okay. The rules to live by, two of the three came through my early days in parking, and I remembered them from then. Again, I'm not sure who gave them to me, but it certainly sounds like Monroe Carroll, most likely. The third one I'll talk about in a minute. The reason I came up with them was just one of those things that happened. I've been in the aviation business my whole life, so I also follow Flying Magazine. And in Flying Magazine, up until recently, because he's passed away, but up until recently, there was a guy that was a physician, a surgeon in Tampa, Florida, who also flew. And how he had the time to do all of this, I don't know, but he also wrote a monthly column for Flying Magazine. So I read his column every month. There were 2 or 3 people that wrote in that magazine every month, and I read his column every month. One column about 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, was rules to live by. And he starts the article with, in everything in life, there seems to be some basic rules to live by. So he said, as a person, I had rules to live by that were taught to me by my parents. As a surgeon, we have some very basic rules to live by, like don't kill the patient, and a few others on top of that. And he said, so I thought I would talk about some of the rules to live by in flying. And in flying, we have several different groups of rules to live by, but one that's very important, and people that follow it live, and people who don't live, to tell about it. But so I'm sitting there reading this article 15 plus years ago, and I thought, I think I know enough to put this together, so I'm going to put one together for the parking business. We sure need rules to live by. So I wrote the first 2 down that came from memory, and then the third one actually didn't come in until about a year later. And a young lady that worked for us at the time, Mary Beth McNair, and I were at a conference somewhere, and in a presentation, I was going over my rules to live by. And what I always did then, and still do today, when I give a presentation and I mention the rules to live by, I already have frames made up like this to hand out to everybody in the audience that were at the show. So I've been handing those out for years, and I go into meetings over the years, and I'll sit down in a meeting and somebody will say, "Oh, let me show you what I have on my desk." And there's my sign. So I know that they are having at least a little bit of an impact. So that last number, the last one is one that it was at a presentation. Mary Beth and I at lunch after the presentation were talking about this, and I don't really remember exactly what caused it to come around, but she and I were talking, and we decided to add a third rule. So that's how the third one came about. So that's basically where this came from, and I think, they're a part of my history from working with some people who had a tremendous amount of influence on this industry. And as I look at them, and especially as we go through our life doing parking audits and operations consulting and financial consulting, as we've looked at operations, hundreds of operations across the country, we can certainly see that the rules to live by would either have had or would have a tremendous impact on the people that we were looking at. So
sure.
That's kind of the basics of where they came from.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So
Sure.
Let's get into them. Let's get into these rules to live by. Okay, so I'm going to list them and then we'll go into detail on each one. So the first one we have is parking is an on the streets business. If you're not on the streets, you're not in the parking business. Number 2, we have get the tickets on the cars and the money in the bank. And number 3, we have know your numbers. Okay, so let's talk about this first one. Parking is an on the streets business. If you're not on the streets, you're not in the parking business. All right, what's the nitty gritty of this one, Clyde?
Well, I kind of believe that statement can probably apply to most any business. If you're a manager, our business happens to be on the streets, so it sounds like it directly applies to us. But I'm not sure it matters what business you're in. What this is really saying is our business is on the street. Our cars are out there. They're not sitting here in your office. There are things that you can do here in your office, but if you don't go out there every now and then, you don't really understand what your customers need, what your company is doing with and to your customers, what can be done to improve it. So the goal of that phrase is to tell you it's an on the streets business. You have to get out of your office to look at it. And if you don't do that, you can't really be in this business. So it's a very direct statement. Our business is outside. It's on the streets. That's where you learn everything. So we can apply that very easily to audits that we've done over the years. And I've always, as we're certainly going to talk about a lot in the coming 2 and 3 weeks, I've always understood and thought about how difficult a parking manager's job is. There are so many moving parts to the job of a parking manager. So when we do audits, we follow the rules, and we can see when some of the managers may be struggling with some of those. Not that there's anything wrong. I understand the overpowering job that they have to do. And so it's just us to be able to then notice that they're not following this rule, and we may be able to help them a little bit. So this one, on the streets business, when we go into an audit, we usually go in before anybody knows we're there. So there's no pretending going on. Nobody knows we're on site. So we come in and we spend the night there and take a look around. We park on the location and watch everything that's happening. And then as the audit progresses, we also watch the operation very well. Well, we see things. So in a matter of a day and hours in a day, we see an awful lot of stuff that when we're then sitting down talking to the manager about their operation, they don't seem to know about. So that tells me that this person is in an overwhelming job. Whoever they work for is forcing them to spend an awful lot of time in their office to get stuff done, get reporting stuff done, and they're not able to spend the time outside looking at their parking operation. I just had a conversation just a couple of months ago with a parking manager that I have known for a while, and his company had changed and had been bought by another company. And his comments were, that he loved the new company that was now he was working for, but he was not used to working for a big parking company. He was used to a small family-owned business. And he said, now, Clyde, I don't have any time to go out and be on my property. He said, I spend all my day, every day, trying to prepare to report to the new owners that I have to deal with. And he said, it's really difficult for me. I'm having to learn how to do this, but at the same time, learn how to be sure that I get out to my property. So I think the job we do is really difficult, and it's hard sometimes to spend that time out there. But we all need to know, and the purpose of us putting the rules to live by together, the purpose for us to bring it up in this podcast and presentations in the past, the purpose of us developing this is to share it with the managers out there, because we know they have such a hard road every day, and this kind of helps them to look and remind them of gosh, I need to get out there and take a look around my property. So that's rule number one.
Yeah, it's a great reminder that's an important step in the overall process that they do every day. Yep, I love that rule.
Yeah, it is. So then the next one, get the tickets on the cars and the money in the bank. So almost as long as I've been using that one, and especially today as we are in this very transformational industry, I say that and I can see the look on people's face like, we're a technology generated company now. We have all this new stuff going on. Does this really apply to us? And the reality is, sure, it applies to us. Get the tickets on the cars and the money in the bank may have been something that would have been generated 40, 50 years ago when we were handing out tickets and collecting cash and trying to get the cash to the bank. But the reality is, it doesn't matter. We're in the parking business. Get the tickets on the car means when the car drove on my property, I recognized it as a customer. So I either hand the driver a ticket, which recognizes it as a customer, takes a ticket out of my inventory that I'm sooner or later going to be responsible for, or they drive in and pull a ticket, or now QR codes. They came on my property and they created a transaction. So get the tickets on the car just really means you're creating a transaction, electronic transaction that we, parking managers, can now track it. I know this car came on my property, and I know it's got to leave. And I know that when it leaves, it's got to pay us. So I should be able to track it through. So the tickets on the cars and the money in the bank means no matter what I'm using for cash control, I recognize that the car came on my property. I recognized how long it stayed there. I recognize that my rate structure says that car should have paid $27.50 when it left. And I see the recording of it leaving, and it paid $27.50. So that, again, falls back into the basics of our business is blocking and tackling. So that rule is one that no matter how much we change in technology, it still applies today. It doesn't change. And I'm going to tell you, there are people out there now that are starting to change the way parking works. And I'm all for, and certainly created more of the technology than most anybody around. But there's some new stuff that's happening that is trying to change that rule. I at this point, I'm still trying to hold my comments to myself on this, but I want to see how this flies. but you can't let people drive on your property without creating a recognition that they're there, because that's how we charge them. So that's rule number 2. Go ahead.
All right. Rule number 3, know your numbers.
Okay, rule number 3 is the one that I said earlier, actually came from a conversation that Mary Beth and I were having probably 15 years ago. And we were talking about something and came up with that we need to add a new one in here, and this is the one that's important. So know your numbers. So this is the only one that I can take any form of a little bit of credit for, but know your numbers. And it turns out once we put it in there, you realize how important it is. I always knew my numbers on the properties that I managed back in the days when I was managing properties. I don't know why, I just knew them intuitively I knew intuitively that I had to know the numbers. And the reason you want to know the numbers is the numbers all tell a story. So if you're managing a lot of parking properties, or even one, the numbers tell a story. And if you know the numbers, you know the story. So we looked at that from that perspective and said, yes, we need to add this in there. And so this became another thing as parking consultants. We realized pretty early on that we already knew this part of it. We knew that there are a lot of numbers in parking. 15 years ago, we hadn't yet seen the explosion of reporting that people have out there that they think they need. We hadn't seen any of that yet. And that I shouldn't have said that I think they think they need. They actually need some of it because it's very important. We've been doing that for almost since the beginning of the parking network, 25 years, taking certain numbers and using those to help look at a parking operation. So we use that very much. And it's almost the basics of where one of our programs, performance monitoring, really came from. Looking specifically at the numbers and tracking those over time. And there are certain very specific numbers in every parking operation. If you look at those and track them over time, they tell a story. You don't have to audit them every day. You don't have to audit them every year. You just have to know the right numbers to watch. And when one of those numbers changes, you notice it. I was just in a conversation with Lee about 2 or 3 months ago. And I won't use the name of the locations, but we were talking about one specific location. And I had just finished looking at the numbers for that location and happened to have them on my desk. And I'm talking to Lee. So I thought, well, this is a good chance to show her how much I mean, because this was a perfect location. Going back even to COVID times, coming forward, I had almost 3 years of numbers in front of me. And one of the line items that we always pick is the average ticket value, which is number of tickets sold in a day divided by the gross revenue gives you an average of what the average ticket is worth, right? Pretty simple, little innocuous number. But we at the Parking Network learned this a long, long time ago. If that number changes, something's happened. So I was showing it to Lee and I said, I'm going to show you this so you can see the numbers, and the average revenue on this particular property was in that $23.50. It was actually like $23.37 was the average every month for years. It would jump around a little bit. It would be $23.47, $23.25, $23.62. And then one day, 2 months before this phone call that Lee and I are having, one month, the number went to $25.12, just out of the blue, and stayed there. And I'm talking to Lee and I'm saying, these are pretty small numbers. pretty innocuous, I guess. It was 2342 and now it's 2513. And it's funny because there's a reason for that. In this particular case, the reason was the parking operator this particular location had a very busy weekend. And the parking operator, not that I agree with the way they did it, but the parking operator changed the daily rate on the weekends. And it went from, like $20 to $25 on the weekend. So only on the weekends, but that little change affected the average income of the entire operation by $2 a day for every ticket for the whole month, which turned out to be in the thousands of dollars. But as an auditor, I could look at this row of numbers and go, how'd that happen? So we want to go look and see how it happened. It can easily also be the reverse of that. Instead of it going up by about $2, it could easily go down by $2 or $3. So if we see that, we know something happened here. So we want to go look and see what it was. I even did that many years ago by looking at an operation and saw that the same thing, saw the numbers drop. And when I saw the numbers drop, I was trying to figure out what could it be. So I called human resources and said, of the company we were looking at, and said, on this particular lot in, I think this was December of the prior year, December or January, did you have any new people assigned to that lot? And they look it up and said, oh yeah, we did. Blah, 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 who's working on there today. He started working for us in December. I said, great. That's when the number went down. It wasn't long after that. It actually took him about 2 months to figure it out. But he was stealing a significant amount of money. And we picked up on it because the average number changed, causing us to look and see what the heck is causing this little deal. And it turned out new employee on the lot. So that's kind of, that's where these things came from. They all came with good intentions. It's an on the streets business. We are on the streets. That's where we work and live in our business. So no matter what you do, if you don't get out there and on the streets, it really is noticeable in how you run your business. Get the tickets on the cars may sound like an old term, but it's very relevant today. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you're managing. I don't care what technology you're using. You still have to record that entry of a car, and then you have to record the amount they pay in the exit to make sure it all matches. And always know your numbers. One other story with know your numbers. When we start an audit, there are 3 or 4 in the interview process. We'll ask questions, and all we're really doing with the questions is to kind of find out. Again, I know how complicated this stuff is. I understand, and I understand there are a lot of managers out there that are really good managers that just haven't had the training to help them stay on top of some of these things. So for me, looking at large numbers of property, there are a few numbers. And if I know these numbers, I can kind of back into what revenue this location should be generating every day. So when we start, I always ask the manager, how many spaces do you have? The difference is instant. They either say 715 or they go, I think it's around 600 and something. So they don't know how many spaces are in the garage. The next number I ask is, how many monthly parkers do you have? So I get the same thing. I get, it varies a little bit, but it's about 450 monthly parkers. Or I get, we have quite a few. So I get that answer, and I know they don't know the answer. And then the last one is, how much transient revenue do you collect every day? I don't know. I think it's about $450 a day, maybe $500 a day. So they don't know. And I can always tell when we have that manager that we have somebody that needs some help because they need to know how important those numbers are. I mean, you can look at their operation and see they've got a good looking operation. They're a good manager. It's just that we have so many details, and in the financial side of it, we have to watch those numbers. And when you watch those, it's just pretty simple, especially today when the technology has put that stuff on our desk almost every minute, to watch those numbers, to know how many spaces you have, how many monthly parkers you have, what the rates are, and what your daily gross revenues are. And if you put those together, you can kind of tell what the revenue is supposed to be every month. And if you look at your monthly P&L at the end of the month and your revenue doesn't match what in your head says this is what it should be, then you know that you probably need to call somebody to have them come take a look and help you out with this. So all of these rules to live by, we use them, and we use them as help. Our job in the industry is mainly to understand these are all really hard jobs. There's a lot of detail to these jobs. Everybody, including me when I was a manager, then all of us need help in this. So the reason for the statements that we sell a parking space for time has been so important. And the reason for the creation of the rules to live by has always been, it's our job to figure out what we can do in the easiest way to help a manager become a better manager of this very, very difficult business. So I'm hoping that it's helped over the years. I'm hoping that it's helped a lot of people. It certainly helped me because I can look back over the 18 years that I was a commercial operator from 1979 to about 1997. And I can look back at that time and realize how much I had on my plate and how difficult it was, and how easily everything I find in an audit today, I could have found in one of my operations.
Yep.
So any help that we can give, and if rules to live by helps, I certainly hope they do, then we're at least trying to do our job, our part of this very difficult job everybody has.
Yep. We hope it helps the listener. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us and we'd be happy to help you answer those questions. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
To quote one of the greatest business minds of our time, Charles Munger, he said, "The best thing a human can do is help another human being know more." Here on our Parking Industry Podcast, we want to provide knowledge and resources. If you heard something that sparked your curiosity in today's episode, please reach out on our socials at TPN Consulting. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. See you next time on Our Parking Industry.